we've traveled around the country all the way to, Solo was in Fototo, I think, in the first week of December. So we are not just staying in the GBA and looking at what's happening, but we are going there because our role is really to supervise, because we don't have customers. Our role is to supervise and make sure that the customers get registered in the proper manner, and the operators also get the information.
So the data that you collect is housed within the service provider and also housed with you at Pura?
The data really is not housed with us. The data is the data that belongs to the service provider.
Good.
All we do is the data is transmitted through us for further transmission to the IEC and the immigration for verification. Once that's done, it comes back to us. And then the ones that are verified as okay are then sent back to the operator to record as okay. And the ones that are not are sent back for them to try and get the proper and the correct details.
All right,
So
let us break that down, and let me invite Ida now. Why go to IEC and why go to immigration? I know IEC conducts and supervises elections as they happen, and the immigration, they give us our biometric ID card, alien's card, whatever card that distinguishes you as a national of a particular country. In this case, I'm a Gambian, of course. Immigration not to give me my passport, and of course my ID card. But yeah, well, let's break it down for the people listening to, watching us and listening to us at this time.
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I think in answering that, we need to also look at the process that Pura followed before we got into implementing the SIM card registration. What we did is we conducted a study of other countries to identify what were their successes and what contributed to their failures. And what we found was the majority factor that contributed to the failures was the fact that there was lack of consultation with all the relevant stakeholders. SIM card registration, if you look at the definition, is the ability to identify a subscriber of a service. Now, the identification documents do not lie with Pura. We are simply the regulators for the different sectors. The GSM operators are simply service providers. The persons who are responsible for identification are the Gambia Immigration Department and the IEC. Yes, the IEC is here for conducting elections, but in doing that, they have to identify voters. And so they already have a database in place for the correct identification of voters. The Gambia Immigration Department is responsible for issuing driver's licenses, responsible for issuing identity cards. And you look at any country in this world, your national ID card is what you use to identify yourself as a national of that country. So in order to ensure primarily that the data being submitted is protected, the only way to ensure that this was done successfully is to create an environment where the persons who are legally mandated to issue these identification documents and legally mandated to obtain this information are part of this process. So as Solo mentioned, the registration actually is in three folds. The first stage is to actually register in person. The second stage is to verify the documentation, and that is with the relevant authorities who are the IEC and immigration, because IEC and immigration, by virtue of their mandate, have to protect the data that they have in their databases. And they cannot allow a third party to access the data, the same way that a GSM operator cannot allow a third party to access their data. So what happens when you verify, as Solo said, you're either verified as correct or verified as invalid. The third stage of registration is notification. Because as a subscriber, yes, I can go and register, but I also want the peace of mind to know that my details have been recorded, they're accurate, and on the cutoff date, my line is not going to be cut off. So it's a three-stage process, and in order to ensure that the relevant authorities are able to verify and say that we are the ones who have the process for identifying Gambians, and this person is identified as appropriately registered, and then we can go ahead and notify them as being registered. So I think, as we said, we're just trying to ensure that really all the relevant stakeholders are involved in this process, and we don't have a backlog of all this data from subscribers that we cannot verify. We're not, the immigration, we're not the IEC, neither can the GSM operators. So their involvement is actually central and very crucial to the success of the project.
You know, something very funny just came into my mind when I looked at the designation of people sitting on this panel. Solo happens seems to be our boss here. Solo is the only director here. You're deputy director, legal licensing and enforcement. My friend Mulamin Somposi says deputy director, technical regulation, electricity. And I'm also deputy director.
Yeah.
So Solo is our boss here.
Yeah.
So Solo,
there's a difference, Mali. You have general after us.
This makes the panel a very eminent panel, and of course the substance we're dealing with is so important, not only for the consumers but also for the state at large. You see, every state needs to have its own security, has to secure the welfare of its citizenry. And when we began this program here, I told you the difficulty I had in registering my SIM card in Algeria. It took me more than 48 hours. In fact, I wanted to give up anyway, but I didn't because I needed a phone to call back home. But anyway, Solo, let me come back to you. The consumer is very important to you, and this is where you will make sure that all the consumers, people using their SIM card, you have to do everything possible to help them. Now, supposing people start fluctuating between, let me say overcrowding. Fluctuating will not be the right word here. Overcrowding certain offices. Are you at the same time telling the operators to open camps around where they can, register people en masse in different locations, let's say buffer zone, Bakau Primary School, stuff like that, within the Greater Banjul area?
Of course, Malik. That is something that definitely would have to happen by default. In that is the whole idea that SIM card registration is not made a burden on the consumer. But when you say consumer, like you say, really, I'm consumer affairs. That's where I work at. My job is made that much more difficult, like what Ida said. That our role is to protect both interests, the interest of the service provider and the consumer. So, but for us at Pura, what we feel really, the best way to do that is to inform and educate the consumers. Because we feel that if the consumer is educated and they are informed, it means they make better choices based on that education that they've had. So it means that makes it a bit more easier for us, because we educate them, we tell them this is what your rights are, these are what your obligations are. As much as you have given rights, you have obligations towards what you are consuming. So once they know this, and once they know that they have this thing under their control, it means they make better choices. So in the same vein, we're using SIM card registration. What we're doing really in terms of the sensitization is we are educating the consumer. We are telling them what SIM card registration is about. We are telling them why they should register, the benefits that they will derive from registration. And of course, if we started realizing or finding out, based on our monitoring, that there are queues and crowds forming in a certain service provider, it means, of course, we'll have to talk